Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. My name is Patty Roberts. I'm at St. Mary's University School of Law in San Antonio. And today's guest is Megan Carpenter. She is the Dean at the University of New Hampshire Franklin Pierce School of Law, a position she has held since 2017. And Dean Carpenter, you are the first female dean at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law, aren't you?
That is correct.
Well, so you've been there now for 7 years, which is longer than the average tenure for deans nationally. And boy, you've had a tremendous impact on the law school. I note that you've increased enrollment by over 200%, increased giving by over 300%. You've increased the number of students of color more than fivefold, and you are one of the top 20 most influential people in legal education, according to national jurists. So first of all, congratulations on all the transformation that you have been a part of at UNH Franklin Pierce School of Law.
Thank you so much. It's been really an incredible team effort over the last 6.5 years or so.
Well, that's great. When you hear all those accolades and the progress that the law school has made under your leadership and that of your team, what is it you're most proud of? What stands out the most for you as the accomplishment that you really are like, wow, that's the one. That's the one that makes a huge difference.
I believe that everything that we've accomplished during my leadership with our team is just part of the overall ethos of the law school. Our founding dean, we have a quote in our foyer from the founding dean that says, "The prospect of starting this law school struck him as a rare opportunity to stop talking about what's wrong with legal education and start doing something about it." And so
that's great.
I love that as kind of the founding ethos of this school, and something that I've really tried during my time here to really center us on thinking, on that same philosophy of, in the landscape, how can we do right by our students, and how can we be thinking about how best to make our students practice ready, how best to educate them in ways that might be outside of the box, and not just doing things the same old way because that's the way that we've always done them. So I would say that probably one of the things I am most proud of is our hybrid JD in intellectual property, technology, and information law. And that is a mostly online JD designed for working professionals in the IP and tech space. We recognized, because our law school was founded to focus on intellectual property and information law long before anybody was calling it an information age. We have our 50th anniversary this year. We've noticed that a lot of people who are interested in IP and tech are kind of mid-career, or people who've been out 3 years, 5 years, and maybe they're in engineering or something, and they're thinking, I love the field, but it's not. Maybe law school is a good way to leverage my strengths in a new direction. And right now, as we think about kind of making a legal career more accessible to people who are differently positioned, people of color, people who are first generation, people who are working professionals, law school is expensive. And if you also have to, in order to get that top education in IP, you have to not only pay for law school, but you have to quit your job and maybe sell a home and maybe move your family to New Hampshire for 3 years. It's a lovely, lovely place to be. But we're limiting that top legal education to a very narrow group of people. And so trying to figure out ways to counter that, to expand the funnel, to make a top legal education more accessible has been really central to my mission here at UNH Franklin Pierce.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the hybrid JD, because it has been wildly successful, at least from an outside observer. I love seeing the social media posts about the immersions that your students take part in the hybrid JD. But before we go into those, if you'd share with us when the hybrid JD in IP, technology, and information law started, what the cohorts look like now, and then what these immersions are like.
Sure. We started with our first class in the fall of 2019. I arrived here in the middle of 2017, and we decided, we were kind of assessing as a community what our kind of innovation path was going to be. So we had brainstorming sessions and focus groups and anonymous surveys. And one of the things we talked about as a faculty and staff staff, we talked about it in terms, sometimes people will talk about it red ocean or blue ocean. Do you go in a direction where there is nobody and you try to kind of create a market for something entirely new? Or do you go try to leverage your strengths in an area where there's a lot of competition, but you try to sort of be the best? And it won't be surprising, I think, to any of us who spend a lot of our time with lawyers that our faculty really wanted purple ocean. They wanted kind of both red and blue,
Of course they did.
And so what they thought, really was they wanted to leverage our existing strengths in a new direction. And so our expertise in kind of IP and tech space and the great, network we have around the world and in our alumni, a way to kind of figure out how to use all of that, but to create something that didn't exist before. So we applied for a variance with the ABA, Council on Legal Education, had a very intense hearing in February, found out in March of 2019 that it was approved. And we then had to bring in our first class by August, which was all hands on deck feat, just because we had such limited time. But we brought a class of, I believe, 43 students in. And
let me just stop you. That's a pretty significant size class for only having time from March to August. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you bring in 43 students. Go on.
Yes. It was funny. There were a group of us kind of waiting for them to come in for orientation. And I have to say that we had worked around the clock to kind of make this happen, to be able to advertise and let people know, because our market was people who don't think they can go to law school. We had to let them know you can go to law school and then get them to take the LSAT and then get them to apply, and had all that happen. And those numbers were still in flux by July 31st or August 1st. And we're trying to kind of nail down the class. So I think that among our team, as we stood there on a day I will never forget, waiting for them to come in for orientation to the building, I think some of us questioned whether they would even be there. I mean, would anyone walk in that door? And when the first group started to walk in, one of my colleagues said, "We've been waiting for you." And without missing a beat, the student looked at her and he said, "We've been waiting for you a lot longer than you've been waiting for us."
Oh, boy.
And that for me just drove home the mission of why we were doing what we were doing, and gave me confidence that we would be able to build the program into a robust program going forward.
What an amazing story. So you have 43 students who start that fall. And how long is the program, and how many students have you graduated at this point?
Oh, that's such a great question. The program is designed to be 3.5 years, sort of no summer break. They have 3 terms a year, fall, spring, and summer. And it's designed to be 3.5 years long to graduation. We've had students that have finished it earlier, more than we expected. The program is kind of lockstep in that first year of classes. We keep the cohort all together, but the program is flexible enough that if there's something going on at work and you need to slow down your classwork, or if you have, during COVID, there were people who really took more classes than they thought they could take otherwise. And so people are able to speed up or slow down. But I think the majority of students are finishing in 3 years or 3.5 years. And we're bringing in our 6th class. I don't know sort of the total of number of students graduating, but we're bringing our 6th class in this fall. And our classes now are just under 100 students, about 95, 97, 93. And remarkably, our classes each year either span 5 decades or 6 decades, depending upon whether we have someone starting in their 70s. I think more often than not, we have had someone starting in their 70s. So that has been sort of a remarkable cohort where people are bringing so much life experience and work experience into the program that these students are learning as much from one another as they're learning from the professors.
Absolutely. I think that would be so enriching. And when you have these students in the program, just under 100 each year, are these mostly students who intend to take the bar exam and practice, or are they getting this degree to help with their existing IP work, not necessarily to practice? objectives?
That's something where I think my ideas of the way that the ABA should calculate what a meaningful job is sort of different in kind than the way that we historically, have thought of this kind of gold standard of you graduate law school and then you become a first-year associate at a law firm. These students they fall into a few different categories. We have entrepreneurs, people who are in the financial services sector who believe that kind of having a law degree will help them in their existing career or maybe they've hit a ceiling. They've been a paralegal or a technical specialist for a long time, and now they want to get that law degree and maybe go in-house somewhere. We always have a handful of doctors in the program every year. And, the intersection of IP and healthcare and biotech is so strong that that's a growing field for us. And, our first doctor in the program, when he graduated, he ended up being put in charge of a 4-hospital system and as an administrator. And so the law degree really helped him achieve that administrative leadership. And that was, one of his goals. But many of these students are not going to graduate and then send out a bunch of resumes to become a first-year associate. We have a lot of executives in the program and people who bring a lot of experience, and each one of them we've learned has a unique path. That's one of the things I love about it, but it tends to defy individual sort of categories.
So you mentioned that you sometimes span 7 decades, right? And 6 decades. What's the average age of the students in the program?
The average age is somewhere between 36 and 38 for each class. We also have 42%, I believe, of our students this year were students of color in the program, and most of those were underrepresented minorities. So the program really is enabling access to populations of people who might be working full-time or have families or can't kind of uproot their lives for law school for a variety of reasons. We also have a high percentage of active duty military or veterans in the program. So about, I think, 18% of this most recent class fell into that category. We also see a pretty even split between women and men, which is common in law schools, but for a program that's focused so significantly on STEM education, that is a statistic I'm pretty proud of as well.
Really outstanding. Now, I'd love to hear about these immersions that I see some posts about, because the experiences seem like they would be experiences of a lifetime for anyone. So please tell us a little bit about how the immersions work, how they fit into the program.
The program is mostly online, but we require the students to get together 4 times a year for these intensive immersion sessions. We schedule them around weekends, which is kind of convenient for most people who are working full time. And so it usually goes Friday to Monday or Thursday to Sunday. And the immersions were grown out of a recognition of a couple things. One is that in the IP and tech community, we have this incredible network. As I travel around and talk to alumni across the country and around the world, they have great fond memories of law school and campus, and they always want to teach something. They want to come back and lecture or teach. But if we're talking to the head of IP at Pepsi or Bayer or Microsoft or Samsung, they're not in a position where they can come and spend 14 weeks in New Hampshire in a semester. So how do we have our students learning from people who are on the ground doing this every day despite this kind of challenging traditional education model? So that was kind of happening. Then the other thing that was happening in my mind is a recognition that, I'll give an example with women, for example, just women and men comprise about equal amounts of numbers of law firm associates when they first start out. But by the time we get to equity partner, 20% of equity partners are women and 80% are men. And so when it comes to similar challenges exist when it comes to first generation, when it comes to practicing attorneys of color. So one of the things that is going to impact that is just recognition and the building of professional networks and relationships while you're in school. So when you make equity partner, you need to have a book of business. You need to have those relationships. And so how can we not just bring in diverse communities of students into the law school, but how do we build their professional networks while they're in school? So they're getting an education not just about law, but they're getting an education around sort of the relationships that will help them as they're looking for jobs later on. Our immersions really address both things. So the first one we did in Silicon Valley, and it was a class on IP strategies for the tech industry. And in contrast to kind of learning case law, the students are learning from the heads of IP at, Google, Apple, Microsoft, Samsung, Lenovo, Dolby, Uber, et cetera. And what they're learning is how the individual companies' business models really impact their IP strategy, which is not something you talk about when you're kind of learning law, how kind of the business strategies, the business structures are really going to influence what the goals are and what the methods are. So Google has a very, very different approach from Apple, but I don't think that, you wouldn't typically know that when you're in law school. So they're learning from all of these people, and these relationships have resulted in research projects and internships. We are having a class next week about media law, and it's being held on the Fox studios. And it's being taught by one of our alumni who is the general counsel at Fox. And he also has an intern from our school that has been in residence for the whole semester there working at Fox. So this is sort of building the relationships, professional networks for students. But the students then are exposed to 8 people, 10 people who are on the ground doing this cutting edge work while they're learning the material, which is an experience that is incredibly unique. And one of the offshoots of it is that the students are bonding with one another. It's almost like a super intense summer camp where they're getting Airbnbs together. They're developing relationships. They're hanging out outside of these lectures in these unique environments. And they're building relationships with each other will last throughout their entire careers. And I wouldn't profess to be a matchmaker, but we did have our first marriage in
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
this past fall. And a few months later, we were gonna have our first, I found out recently we're gonna have our first baby coming year. So
that's very cool. That's funny. I mean, with our online JD program, we have been surprised how close the students become and how connected to each other they are. But I never thought in a million years we'd have a marriage. So it's amazing that you got one and so early in the process. Well, those immersions sound extraordinary. And all of your students in a class go at once?
We have 4 per year. Well, we offer up to 6 opportunities per year, and students choose 4. Students can always come here because we have a simultaneous immersion happening on campus for each time. And then we have some limited number. Usually it could be up to 50 or up to 30 who are able to go on these immersions away. And we have a rotating schedule. It's kind of every other year. So students have the opportunity to have a variety of experiences in different locations while they're in school with us.
Really cool. Well, I'm glad that that's going so well. And boy, you've really tapped into a niche area, a purple area, right?
It is the purple word.
Red and blue. It is the purple approach to legal education. That's outstanding. As we head towards the final part of our podcast time today, I wanted to ask you about something that UNH Franklin Pierce, even though it is only 50 years old, has become the gold standard in, and that is the idea of an alternative entry to the bar using a portfolio and a path that does not have to include the bar exam. And at this time, when many states are considering alternative paths, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the Daniel Webster Scholars Program and its success.
I would be happy to. It's under the direction of Courtney Brooks, who has been involved in the program for a long time. And this program is a combination of it's a collaboration between the law school and the Supreme Court in New Hampshire and then the bar. And one of the things I think I've realized about the legal community in New Hampshire is there aren't 6 degrees of separation between anyone. It's like 1 degree of separation. It's a small and close-knit community. And I think that has helped this program really thrive over the years. The program relies on hundreds of volunteers. And the students, we have a maximum cohort each year of 25 students. And the students, after they're done with their first year, really spend the bulk of the next 2 years in a unique curriculum that is engaging them in simulations and they draft motions, they make oral arguments. They're making those arguments before the Supreme Court. The whole state has really embraced this program. And the bar examiners review the portfolios each semester, each year, as the students are going through the program. I think one of the concerns when we first started the program about a little over 15 years ago now was that the students would people want to hire them? One of the difficulties as we think about new approaches to the bar exam and new ways of licensing attorneys, sometimes there's been some reluctance, and the legal community might say like, hey, I had to take the bar exam. Why should they not have to take the bar exam as well? And in education and in law, sometimes we're slow to evolve to innovation and change. But now that we're well into this program, we actually have to say to people, they'll call and say, do you have any Webster scholars that that are graduating that we can hire? And we say, we have lots of students that are wonderful that are not DWS students. And so you should think beyond the DWS model, because that program has been so successful, across the board. When you look at some of the research that's been done through IELTS and other organizations, the students that are graduating from that program are practicing already at the level of someone who's been practicing a couple of years out. And now there's been so much pressure on law firms, when I graduated from law school, I know that my firm knew they were going to lose money on me for the first few years, and they would train me up and make that investment. But law firms, very rightfully so, are expecting law schools to do the job of educating students, not just to think like lawyers, but also to practice law. And they want to hire people who are going to add value earlier. So I think it's important for all of us in legal education to think about ways to help students be practice ready when graduate. And the Daniel Webster Scholars Honors Program is just an excellent way to do that. Now, one of the difficulties for all of us in legal education, and something that I think a lot about it at our school, is how do we scale it? Because it does rely on a lot of volunteers, a lot of collaboration, a lot of time in the law school and in the community. And so if we can think about, on a national scale, alternative licensure and supervised pathways to practice, I would really encourage that kind of thinking, because we were the first, but we're still the only program of its kind. And I think it's a very difficult model to think about scaling.
And are those students, are they recruited into the program when they start their first year, or do they apply at some point later? And how are they selected? And then the other question I have is there a lockstep required curriculum, or is the portfolio just based on any of the classes that they take?
Those are two very good questions. We offer two pathways to entry. So some students are offered a conditional acceptance into the DWS program upon admittance to the law school. There's always an interview process, but they get that kind of conditional admission depending upon how they do in that first year. Also, there might be students who do not apply when they first come in, but express interest later. And so students may also be chosen at the end of that first year of law school who didn't receive that conditional acceptance. The program is fairly lockstep. So after the first year, you do enroll, as an individual cohort for DWS. You're taking classes together. There are some electives, and so there can be some specialization. But in general, the program is incredibly intense and takes through this 2L and 3L year. We do have one unique program that we have in addition to the DWS program, as in our residency program, which is an externship program, but students are embedded somewhere for a semester or up to a year, working full-time somewhere. And there are students who've managed to be enrolled in DWS and still do an externship somewhere else. They just have to be very thoughtful of how they craft their curriculum, but it does allow some flexibility.
Well, it remains the gold standard, and I know that any of the state courts that are looking at whether or not to have alternative licensing pathways have looked at your program. So thank you for sharing a little bit about it. Hard to believe it's been in existence now for 15 years and not replicated. That's sad. But good for you. It shows that you definitely were leaders and continue to be leaders in that area. Exciting also to hear about the hybrid JD and the success of that program and providing access to those who didn't think they could take time from their careers to become lawyers. Before I get to my final question, I just want to ask you, I know you were at Texas A&M before you went to UNH. You were the founder and former director of the Center for Law and Intellectual Property at Texas A&M School of Law. How long does it take when you move out of Texas to stop missing HEB?
Never. And also your blood thins out. So when you move to a cold area, you like end up cranking up the heat wherever every chance you get. I miss Texas and Fort Worth terribly. I miss the Central Market is another one. So HEB and Central Market are two that's been a little hard to live without.
Yes, I think HEB should come up with HEB care packages for those who were in Texas and leave. There are a few deans I would send them to, but all right. Well, before we conclude, if you would share with us what your predictions are for the future of legal education in the coming decade.
Patty, I know that you have, St. Mary's has been also very forward thinking when it comes to online legal education. But I think we so often try to put things into categories and boxes, and this might be our tendency as lawyers as we think about applying facts to a certain rule. But I think that what we're going to see in the coming years is a real blurring of kind of online, residential, non-residential education. There's work that can be done online very, very well. And then there's some great things that can happen in person. And so rather than having these kinds of categories of this program is online, this program is residential, I would love, and I think that we will see, it's kind of inevitable that we'll see this like blurring of lines that will focus more on pedagogy of how students learn best rather than you fit into this category or you fit into that category. I love that movement and I look forward to being a part of it. So interesting to see the law schools that are experimenting with different models. And I would just encourage everyone to be thinking in experimental terms because this is a rapid change. How education looks right now doesn't have to be how it looks in 5 years, in 10 years, in 20 years. And we all think about what's in the best interest of students and how students learn best. Then I think we'll all get to a point where legal education might look very different than it does right now.
See, that makes you and I excited. It doesn't excite everyone. And we're both smiling ear to ear. I agree with you.
I learned that when I first got here and we were thinking about how to innovate, I learned that not everybody works at a law school because they want to be part of a startup. But go figure.
That's a really significant understatement. But thank goodness there are some people like you who have those ideas for new initiatives and a team that will follow you into the purple wave. I was surprised and delighted to hear when we had our recent Dean's Dialogue and Bill Adams, the managing director of the section of legal education for the American Bar Association, said there are 19 programs now that have some kind of significant online hybrid delivery model at law schools. So that's, 20, almost 20 out of 200. That's pretty good. We're well on our way. And I agree with you. There should be a menu of possibilities for students. It's not all going to work the same for each individual student, and particularly as we get to educating more underrepresented groups. So I applaud your efforts and look forward to more innovations among law schools. Well, thank you so much for sharing about the hybrid JD and intellectual property technology and information law at UNH Franklin Pierce, and more about the Daniel Webster Scholars Honors Program. And enjoy the rest of the year.
Thank you. And thanks for all you do, Patty, at St. Mary's and otherwise.
Thank you. Now, if you'd like to listen to other thought leaders in legal education, you can find additional episodes on Aspen Leading Edge's podcast webpage or at other channels where you find your favorite podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you.